So you got right as the human, as a human, then you're sort of thinking, oh right, so there's obviously a wider context here that hasn't actually been described, but that context is informing the way the question is being asked. At which point you can unlock it is you can rephrase it into a question you understand to take it forward. But an AI can't do that yet, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a wildly profitable problem if it can be ever solved, but I almost think it requires a change of mindset to how we even approach products and problem spaces, to be far more weighted on the periphery and on the edge cases than we are currently.
But there's one other aspect I think is overlooked, and it's the human factors one, is that I think it's a very, very different skill, and one that people haven't really thought through and bottomed out. Sort of actually understanding that, writing in that sort of area. Partly it's all about most people I'll put it simply, most people are quite selfish. So what they're doing is they're trying to solve their own problem. So it takes quite a different sort of attitude to solve somebody else's problem, where solving their problem is the pass fail. It's not whether you understand it, it's whether they are not in an overly pleasing way, but just that, in other words, the task that you are solving is one that is only resolved by whether the person with the problem can fix it. And that's not much thought through. And that's why a lot of documentation is actually subpar, because it's all, well, this is my understanding of it. This is all you need because it works for me. Yeah. I do not have the problem you do have. So it's not
very interesting. And on the question side, like the questions I'm trying to answer right now, the questions tend to be along the lines of, give me the recipe to bake a pie, but explain the universe first. That whole old chestnut. It's like that. Like the questions are, if I were to take the question literally and literally answered it, it would be, Wikipedia.
I think a lot of our trouble with the AI is that everyone's in, basically what amounts to is a word counting model. You're going to just count up how many times one word appears in conjunction with another word. You throw the whole thing at a neural net and you hope that the example documents are going to result in it yanking out the correct match from the cluster. And I think if we went back to symbolic AI and we actually understood the grammar and applied a symbolic approach to recognizing the meaning of the utterances that we're querying against, we could come up with much better results. And I'm sort of torn there because there are two grammar formalisms that are equally appealing to me. One is parsing expression grammars, which provide a single canonical parse, and they're very finely tuned for artificial languages and computer type applications. Then for natural language, I'm really drawn to combinatory categorical grammars. And it's Mark Steedman's work out of University of Pennsylvania. And that deals very nicely with coordinate structures, gap filling dependencies, and all of the more nuanced kinds of grammatical constructs that appear in English that don't correspond to parsing expressions. And it seems like what we really need is someone to do a PhD in unifying those two formalisms and building a bridge between them.
I'm not
and
sure.
That work hasn't been done yet, and I'm watching for it.
I'm not sure if I entirely agree with what I think is the gist of this conversation, that I walked in late on because of the time differences and all of that. But so, to kind of, please just shut me off if I'm saying something wrong based on what you're saying. If we expect AI to be able to communicate with us and answer questions based on our kind of understanding of language, I'm not sure if that's an interesting goal at all. Because AI is a tool, a medium, call it what you will. But, when you're in a fighter plane, you don't have a soldier saying, look, I'm not going to fly this plane because if I flap my wings, it doesn't go up, right? You have to learn that tool. You have to learn that environment. And also, having done the tests that we did of having transcribed our conversations here, our speaking is awful, guys. It's truly awful. Because of all the context we get live, we get it. You know, we can be part of the conversation, but we do the ums and the ams and the incomplete sentences. I think we need to probably find a middle way where
well, the chicken egg here, which started this conversation before we came in, was about documentation, and the fact that normally the one thing documentation doesn't actually explain is how to use something. It sort of, you know, it describes all the knobs and switches, and and probably not even them. And in most cases, it just tells you what's on the label. It doesn't actually tell you what they do. More importantly, it doesn't say what to do when you get to the predictable place where you get stuck when you actually use it, and what you need to go look at. And I still think that's a very human function. It's also a human function because it goes across the piece. And another big problem is people tend to organize structures around skill sets. And it's a skill set that runs across the piece because it doesn't just live in an engineering sphere or a marketing sphere or a technical writing sphere. It actually lives in a solving problem sphere. So it doesn't really matter where the source information comes from. The key thing is to understand how you help people understand problems. And that's where it came down to the AI. It's quite difficult at this stage. It's quite difficult for a lot of humans to understand that problem space. I think it's a while before the AI does that. Then again, people keep raising lots of money claiming this is what they're going to do. So I don't exactly feel sorry for them losing their shirt on the investment.
But this
was not so much to do, like removing AI from the conversation entirely. And I'll just add a little bit to this because I as I said earlier, I feel this issue very deeply. And to give you some context, one of the things that Twilio is famous for is its incredible documentation. The developers love Twilio because the documentation is so good. And even that documentation, first off, I don't find to be sufficient for, unless you are like coming at it as a node developer, you know, Python, you know, then maybe it makes sense if you're dyed in the wool. If you're coming at it from any sort of other sort of angle, it doesn't work out so well. And also, more to the point, there's still a trade-off because yes, we have really good documentation, but now that becomes part of the problem because we have a mountain of documentation and you never know if you've read the right thing. It keeps updating, you know, and there are links to other things. And so no one ever feels like satisfied. Like I just finished that book, you know? So it's a very interesting, I don't know, epistemic trade-off.
Well, I can echo that, having sort of written ATV Ref for 14 years now. So it's a documenting an open tool set used by a very disparate bunch of people who are, you know, not all the same first language, doing things mainly that they've come to use the tool for because ordinary tools don't work. It's been a genuine and continues to be a real learning experience about at what point do you start culling stuff out? So everything changes, you know, the sort of the wider context changes, the operating system it sits on changes. Major apps with which the users will interact will change significantly. And all these things can massively change the problem space that you resolve. So yeah, I get it, yeah. For Freud, that's the new beast. That's the 14-inch arrived today.
Yeah, I just find it absolutely disgusting watching, you know, Mark, because the new display on this machine is out of this world. And instead of you just using that display, you put these horrible other things to have the same. It's just, could you move?
Well, no, because the user account that's on here is washed through, I've lost count how many different operating systems. So I thought, you know, what I'm going to do is I will rebuild all the apps and stuff on this, and I'll just move the user data over. And yeah, some of the back behind the curtain scripts and things will break, but actually, it's about time to clean house.
Yes. So on this documentation thing, last time we also talked about, you know, the importance of developing to try things, not just to talk about it. And those two things are, of course, intimately related because you have to somehow document what you develop, you know, and what it is. I think it goes close to what we're trying to do. So Friday, of course, I'm gonna, well, tomorrow I'll make the video for Vint for his Friday presentation. And Fridays, of course, when I'm talking to the Adobe people. And also I've got a massive final bill from my programmer for author. And it's just, yeah, it makes your computer, Mark, look like, anyway, it's really, really tough. So
anytime you want
Is
to learn to
service
program
included, or is
code,
it a tip
I
on
will
top?
tutor you personally so that you can write the code yourself. Just let me know anytime you want to dive in. I'm here for you.
to learn to code properly on the Mac.
Yeah, but using the web tool set, not Apple's, but go with the generic web foundation, which will then automatically be cross-platform.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in that. I'm really, really, really interested in getting really super incredibly fast performance. So, you know, I'd much rather look at some of the machine learning and so on Apple has, but I don't have the intellect to go into that, especially at my age. I learned today that my supervisor is significantly younger than me, so that was highly unpleasant and amusing. But anyway,
there is an upside to that. So when my supervisor said to me, I was having a senior moment, I was saying, "No, look here, I really can't accept that from someone who's much my junior."
Children, yeah. But so the thing is, you know, so you know, we're all different stages in our career. But last week with Emily in Cyprus, God, the flight back was horrendous. But that's another story. 7-hour flight, but 2 hours on the runway, because the people delivering aviation fuel try to screw the airline for 1,000 liters of fuel. Anyway, so questions of where to go next. I think I have no choice. I think what I have to do is try to find a way to start and finance a proper research group. You know, there has to be some money flowing into these things. So, you know, something for us all to think about. How it's really nice to have these chats on Mondays and Fridays. I'm super grateful for you guys. You know, we published 2 books now, and there will, Adam, I know, Alan, you are sending something soon. Adam, what about you? Article for the book. Important point. Hi, Raphael.
Yeah, as I've said before, every hour I can put into code or into Friday discussions or late night emails or writing an article. And for me, writing takes so much time. I rewrite and rewrite, and it still doesn't come out right in linear text, plain text. So I rather do a bunch of napkin sketches and rough prototypes or small videos to show the things. And I think because I can do that, I think that's my medium more. Of course, I can force myself to write text, but I don't know if it's valuable enough compared to the other stuff.
I think what you just said would be a great introduction to an article, because I very much feel the same as you. I can write. I don't have any problems writing, flowery writing or whatever. And then it's the matter of getting it into some cohesive form. I find that incredibly difficult. So I think that's one of the problems both you and I are working on helping users do. But if you wanted to write something about how you, as an intelligent person who knows how to code, have problems writing ordinary text, you know, and even if you write it badly, that has real value. And also, if you follow that with some of your sketches, maybe a few screenshots, maybe, you know, link to something live that'll live as long as it does, that would be a really wonderful contribution.
Yeah, but still, okay. I always wonder if I increase the average value of the book or if I decrease the average value. So if I do a kind of a rough thing that, of course, many things in life have value, but is it worth diluting the good wine with water or a bad wine? So that's how I feel about it.
We can turn your water to wine.
I feel the same, and so I'm there with you, especially because it's almost like, well, don't we have too many words already? You know, like just out there floating around. But to kind of Frode's point, and maybe this is a larger conversation or something for, maybe there's an opportunity, but it's an interesting frame to start with future of text. but very quickly it becomes it's like a Zen koan in a way, you know, where you're like, wait, so am I talking about the future of technology or am I talking about the future of text? Because in a way they're the same thing, you know, and then you might as well be asking, what's the future of blue, right? Because it's always been there, it's always going to be there. So I've actually come up with some prompts for
Blue has
myself.
not always been there, so that's an interesting point, but please go
Well,
on.
yes, that's a theory. That is a revisionist theory that may or may not be accurate.
No, but
It's really fun to think that we didn't have blue back in Homeric times, but
not even that, to be able to reproduce blue. You know,
No, that's
most of the lapis comes from Afghanistan. It just wasn't available. So yes, you could see blue in the sky, but because it didn't have an affordance to you as an artist to communicate, it didn't exist
Right.
in that sense.
So getting true. Point is that it's a very somewhat perhaps troublesome way to get started. So a couple of prompts that I've come up with for myself and tried it out. One was like, instead of actually writing, I just had quotes that I thought were pertinent and ordered them in such a way that maybe you could find a connection in between them, right? And that was satisfying. Another one I did, which was pretty fun, and I might wind up submitting this one, is rather than answering the future of text, focusing more on the time capsule part and talking to the future and saying, here's where we are right now, but framing it in a different way, you know, mixing in common facts, but also maybe a slightly different way of looking at what now is. So, and I've got a few others of interest, but that kind of thing may be helpful for future editions or to draw us, you know, to turn it into something that's a little easier to work with. Certainly the quotes part.
Adam and Alan, since you were just talking, I've never met you IRL, but I love you both. But what you're saying specifically today, it makes me genuinely furious. It makes me fucking angry. Right. So we have this Glasgow thing starting today, right? A couple of mostly old white men coming together to say whether they're going to continue trashing the place with their big party or whether they're going to make
that thing. Right? Yeah.
So in this context, so when I managed to write the bulk of the introduction to yesterday, I was in the right mood, artistic frame of mind, and all of that stuff for the book. It also makes me angry that, you know, there's the Dunning-Kruger thing, fair enough. And then there is the imposter syndrome on the other side. But here we have two exceptionally bright people, you guys, who want to change the world for the better by helping people communicate and think. And you're doubting whether your contributions will fit the mold. I mean, I am 1 month away from either having or failing my PhD. And what I've learned doing my PhD is the value of you guys, the insanity of crap to fit the kind of university in club. There's just so much clutter there, right? So when you have real people trying to do real thing, to even question yourself, I mean, you're in a really safe, loving space there for you guys not to say, look, I don't know how to write a normal academic article. I don't know what the hell this is. Can I do this?
I'll put it to you though, Frode, perhaps it's
where you can just do that.
Perhaps it's a measure of our engagement and involvement that it makes trying to distill all of that comes out so naturally in conversation into something that is equivalent to a statement on a gravestone. That's so much more difficult. Like we're trying to encompass everything about this life that we think about every day into a little blurb that could actually be the same message that someone said before. You see, so it almost makes it more difficult.
Yeah, but Alan, to put it in this way, this is my book. I have made this out of a decade of doing symposium and talking about this stuff, right? And I am basically an artist. I went to Chelsea School of Art. I started as a photographer. I would roll my own film. I'm not an academic. I'm not an intellectual. I'm certainly not a scientist or an engineer. You know, what I hoped we could come together to do is, you know, spray flowers on a wall. So it's really nice to hear you guys talk about that. But what I want you to do with this thing, and this is why we're talking about the different bindings and technologies of the book and all of that stuff. The whole idea is that we use this notion of the future of text to put whatever the hell you want in there, right? As a provocation. Some of the pieces are overly long and boring. I don't feel I can judge not having them in. Some of them are really brief. Some of them is just one picture. Have you seen the ones that are the people having done annotations in the book, and then he takes every annotation in the book, turns it into one image? That's all it is, right? So Alan, as a senior member of this community, as you all are, because you show up, if you want to do 5 different essays or pieces or provocations in one book and make them 2 words long or 20 pages, I apologize that I haven't made it clear to you guys. You can do whatever you want. You know, the external people are coming into this community. Yeah, we give them 1,000 words, we give them a style guide, whatever. That's a starting point.
One thing I was thinking of listening to this is the fact that one of the things I'm sort of conscious of, and which forced me over the line of writing something down, was it's a matter of being seen and heard in the process. So there's an awful lot of work, you know, I think, especially of, you know, Adam's visualizations, which would otherwise be completely missed. So you'll see it being talked around. So, you know, if it's worth anything, it's just worth perhaps recording some of the things that have got done, perhaps with a little leveling around the outside. So this is the sort of problem we're looking at. Because actually, that's quite interesting going to what Alan said, because it is a sort of note to future self. So, well, at this point, this was a perfectly genuine problem that we were trying to noodle around. And the fact that we may or may not have a solution to it is almost incidental. Because otherwise, these little facets of things are lost in the sand of time. And you just get these step changes. And, you know, we're still doing the same thing. You mentioned, you know, getting out a set of quotes. Well, you know, here we are. This is the sort of medieval commonplace book.
That's a really important point, Mark. And Peter, just one moment. Maybe one of the best moments, well, yes, the best moment in any future of text I've ever had was when I was a teacher and there was talk of somebody getting millions out of some tech stuff. And one of the other teachers stood up and said, "This is all about making millions." And I said, "No." And then I referred back to the ARPANET. And I was, you know, as I was telling the story, I realized, oh, sorry, Bent, you're sitting next to me. Would you mind continuing the story? So that was a great moment for me. However, the point of that story is there were no adults in the room, right? There wasn't a United Nations or government thing or MIT or whatever saying, we must make an internet to do this. They basically just got whatever student was available. These were all graduate students, right? And the thing that has really come out of this, doing a decade of this, is there's no adults in the room for this either. So for Mark to say that, yes, if we write a chapter or even an entire book of saying, shit, we don't know, that has real value for those coming up who thinks that this has been worked out. To map the unknowns has absolute value. Peter.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that even if it's not a fully fledged piece on Adam, just the ideas alone, even if they're really rough around the edges, could provide that link that someone needs to be able to get where they want to go, and they wouldn't have been able to do so otherwise. I had many papers where the whole paper is mostly rubbish, but there'll be something in a footnote, and the footnote, or just a turn of phrase, even a random turn of phrase in an abstract, can lead to a connection snapping in your head that's every bit as valuable as the fact that nothing in the paper other than that phrase was of use to you. Anyhow, unfortunately, I'm going to have to bow out now for elder care transport. Talk to you guys again on Friday.
Sorry
but
about
I totally
timing, Peter.
agree and echo everything Frode was saying there.
Thank you. Yeah, one more thing that's kind of important is some people will be crazy enough to buy the book in printed form, which is super lovely. You know, I think we make $1 every month or something, but most of this will be read digitally. And of course, some will read it through crap PDF readers, but also some will read it through Reader. And I hope in the future, others will make more advanced PDF viewing mechanisms. So that's why if someone writes something long and boring, you skip past it. It doesn't have any There's no problem. So for the sake
I
of
got an idea.
hang on, yeah, I'm going to let you say your idea, but for the sake of argument, Alan, why don't we say that you're going to write 5 articles by the end of tomorrow?
I've written quite a bit. They don't have polish. My problem is not so much that. What I want to focus on, though, is Adam's essential argument is, I think, correct. Personally, I'd rather Adam spend his time on coding than wrestling over something to write, because the ideas come through the code. So here's an idea. Whether it applies for me or for the both of us, if Adam and I have a conversation about the future of text, I transcribe it, clean it up, and it's that interview that then goes in as either Adam's submission or Adam and I's submission. I mean, I got other stuff that I can put in, but that might be a way to quickly get some core ideas out without having to sweat the small stuff.
Well, that's perfect. You've seen the current draft of the book. I'm not sure if you've seen the version that has some of the prime ministers in there whom I interviewed. Interviewing is a very, takes a lot of, the transcript takes a huge amount of space. So that was interesting in and of itself. It's really wasteful. There's a lot of mumbling, but it's in there. It is what it is. It's cost it or not. You know, I cleaned it up a little bit, but yes, if you guys want to do that, I think that would be fantastic. We can use, I have an account with Descript that I'm testing. So if you do a recording, I can run it through that, send it to you, and you can do whatever for the polish you want.
Okay, great. I've got Otter, but I love Descript. So Adam, are you up for that? Think about it.
I would think about it. It's just hard to find the time. Today I stayed home with 3 sick kids, and that's nice, but also intense. And we have started having some side discussions about text and the nature of text, maybe.
Yes.
And that's really interesting, because I think we have the metaphor of fish in water. It really goes with text, that we are so used to the many conventions of text and technologies of text and I think it's time to break some of those conventions, because digital affords so much in the interactive and temporal space, for example, that how we treat the text in many dimensions. So would it be nice to map out those and the things you talked about texting, and I've been thinking a lot about not annotations, but what do you call it when you captioning, when you caption other media, other relations, the text in discussion with other types of media, and the future there. So there are many dimensions that are worth at least mapping out, even if you don't come to any conclusions.
Yeah,
I've been thinking a lot about graffiti lately, and how basically social media is graffiti. But there are other, but graffiti also has other qualities to it. So social media is the now accepted. It's not on the edge, but there are other on the edge kind of digital graffitis going on, where we might find the future of text. Like explorable explainables is one that's not a great example, but actually even coding languages, there's a kind of graffiti. Anyway.
That's interesting, very interesting. So I started, when I was writing my intro, I started a bit of a ramble with text is, you know, many bullet points. And then something, it doesn't matter why, something happened where I thought about what my father used to say a lot. He was a very successful businessman. He was not an artist like me. He was very even-handed and all of that stuff. And he had this phrase he used a lot that I think is really important to us. And I'm really sad I can't tell him how valuable I find it. And that is, if you say something and I disagree with you, he would say, I would then say, I would characterize it as. He didn't say, I think it is. Right? So he basically said, my glossary definition is, right? My perspective is. which it made it so approachable to continue a dialogue. I think he built his empire based on that sentence. So within the context of what we're doing here, when we write an article, that is what we're doing. I would characterize the future of text as probably being related to graffiti kind of thing. And it also removes, it also removes the ability to criticize it in a blank way, right?
I must say, I can say, having punted something over the line, that the sort of challenge of polishing something to at least the level where I'd let it out the door, because it's been interesting. In the, one of the things that made me think on a lot is that a lot of stuff, if you know, things that we've been thinking about involve sort of paratext and metatext that let sort of primary texts, which we might think of in terms of finished books, that kind of thing, that allow these things to exist. Which is interesting of itself, because a lot of this sort of scaffolding stuff is all behind the curtain, broadly considered just make work, and sort of not given much prominence or much support, and yet actually it's incredibly important. And where it's pertinent to where we are now is that most of that used to be done with sort of pen and paper. So you could go and look, you could go and look at an author's commonplace book or something. Now that whole sort of toy box has massively increased in potential, and all we've really got to so far is sort of PKM tools, which often just turn out to be a big bucket for putting things in, and that's not a bad thing. You know, it's better than having no bucket, but it doesn't necessarily move things forward. So I must say, I will admit that just spending actually most of the summer constantly re-looking at what I tried to keep making smaller to boil down the idea has been actually quite useful as a meditation exercise on some of the aspects of the issues we're dealing with.
When we look at history, one of the things I'm sure you also feel is, oh, they were so stupid back then. Right? It was only the strong physical men who could be making decisions. I think we have similar kinds of things today. I think that in academia, the whole notion that you need to be write a really long document in a linear fashion is like having a specific kind of muscle. You know,
I think that partly stems from people not knowing how to do assessments. Well, not knowing how to do assessments, and also in a manner that can be seen to be fair and also judged by others as being consistent across the piece. And it's not without challenge.
No, there are reasons for it, but like, you know, Adam is a coder. He would rather build. You know, when I was at art college, you know, for me to write down my art, what? That's like, you know, as the joke goes, making a song about a painting. You know, these are different media. So we cannot afford to keep these artificial boundaries. You know, we must make ways. I mean, obviously, Alan is doing really well in the tech industry, so he knows how to fit in there. But the way he now has all these intellectual ideas, and in this context, he is thinking, you know, do they fit in this thing that, because it's a book, seems semi-academic? It isn't. Some of the pieces are academic, of course they are. But, you know, we have a job to really build the tools, and Raphael is very much on the lead with this, with me, build more tools that more people can express more, but not just in an express more, here's a social media moving text and there's a picture in the background, but express more in a way that can be related to, right? To have a real dialogue. That was a rant, sorry.
Well, it's funny, I found myself, I had an amusing thought that when you were showing me the other day, the latest thing you're playing around with in terms of effectively doing things like annotating headings and things. And I was thinking, well, if you go back to my little piece I sent you, but in a sense, it's this thing of saying, well, you know, it's all going to get ripped apart sooner rather than later. So having an understanding of what the parts having a degree of self-description is not without value. And then the challenge comes, well, how do you go about that if you are working within a sort of paradigm that says what you're really doing is creating a linear form you make an outline, and then you populate from end to end, because that doesn't give you a space for stopping to say, actually, the first, third, and 14th parts of this are a piece of their own. They fit where they fit in the overall narrative, but they also are a thing of their own, which, for instance, I might take and repurpose elsewhere. And if you go back to the more documentation type example, Alan, myself, and the others were discussing when you started, this actually becomes more pertinent, because these are little trails, entities, objects within the overall corpus that you do want to actually have some sight of, or a small number of people have to need usefully to have sight of them, be they a person or a suitable bit of code, have sight of, so they can do useful and productive things with.
So it's past. Alan and Adam, when do you want to do your interviewing dialogue with each other? Do you want to do it?
Not right now.
Private?
I am. Yeah, in private later in the week is an idea. Adam, I'll reach out to try and find a time to, if you want to do that. If not, I mean, if it's going to be quicker to just put together a paragraph, then go for it. I'm not tied to that either way. Now would not be a good time because I'm actually trying to answer a security questionnaire while we're all talking. So
good luck with that.
It's the love of my life. It's what I when I fell out of my mom's womb, I said, I want to be answering security documentation. God, please give me the tools and the intelligence.
Are you now, or have you ever been? Yes.
You'll take me back to the birth of Edgar now. Anyway, Torpedo Boy. Anyway, I mean, one alternative you guys could is quite simply not writing complete sentences, call it poetry.
I have actually, it's funny, I could give you a tour of the various different angles I've taken at this, and I enjoy everything that comes out of it.
Throw it out.
But it's almost like it's a writing prompt, basically.
Right.
The most recent one was the time capsule approach, which it's more just a matter of cleaning it up. So I'm not worried about it. I'll get it done. So the metaverse thing made it interesting, and that's another topic to go into.
And don't forget to put blockchain in there somewhere, because that always helps.
So, Raphael, I see you have your hand, but just on a brief note on that, the whole horrible situation with the whole climate change stuff, to me, one of the key things is we can't afford to have idiots in the world, right? And that means we have to augment those people who violently disagree with us. That means augmenting everybody. And what do we mean by augmenting in this context? We just interact with the way they come across information better, right? Without preaching. It has, we can do lots of artistic things for longer term knowledge, but also that. Anyway, Raphael.
I just wanted to ask regarding the time zone. Was there like daylight savings time that changed or something? Because everything moved 1 hour forward.
Sorry. Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. That explains. Okay.
Yeah. So the left and right banks, I think, of the Atlantic changed their summertime 1 week out, because that's generally helpful to everyone. And I think that's what's been.
But do you want to keep it the previous time, or?
Well, it's only for a week. When do you guys change? Looking at my calendar here.
Brazil doesn't change anymore. The new president removed daylight savings.
Oh, so he has one positive thing. Well, that's good.
Yes, the only one.
Wow.
You're being recorded.
More than zero. Okay. Well, America. Well, there's only Alan who's in America now. Then, when are you changing time zone?
I have no idea.
I think it's next weekend.
My recollection is it's normal, because there's normally a week twice a year in which all transatlantic stuff gets in a bit of a mess, because we can't agree on changing on the same week.
I'm just asking because
why would we?
For me, it falls right like at noon. So I either have lunch either before the meeting or after the meeting. So I have to plan my Mondays and Fridays accordingly.
Okay, well, I'll ask that next Friday we do it, as in this coming Friday, we do it as today, if you don't mind, for that one.
Okay.
And then we see. Is that okay, guys?
Yeah, that's fine by me.
Okay.
So that would be starting at 1 then instead of noon. And then, yeah, related to the book and writing articles and everything. There's this I don't want to say pressure, but whatever Alan and Adam said regarding putting water in wine, I very much echo, because now you're interviewing ex-presidents and all of these important people. And suddenly the bar became, not that the first book the bar wasn't high, I mean, there's a lot of incredible people in the first volume. But I kind of feel like part of that is to write material that is, it's, I wouldn't say on par, but it's at least, worthy of being there as well. But on the other side, I also agree with Frode, where I think, and what Peter said, like sometimes a footnote changes everything. So just putting something that is interesting that maybe you're not completely the person to talk about, but somebody else comes and builds upon it. I find that very, very valuable as well. So that's how I'm going by.
But it comes back to what I think all our teachers said a long time ago: write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And these presidents, they know politics. They don't know much about text, but they have some scraping of text, and they have an interesting insight. There's nobody in this book that's any more knowledgeable than any of us. That's really, really important. We're really trying to dig through. And it's really, really hard because, as you guys were saying earlier, it's like inventing water, it's around us. Really, really hard to see.
Well, instead of doing NaNoWriMo at the moment, you could have sort of Atto-Ri Day. Just get a tiny piece out.
But Adam, I find your situation really, really interesting. If you had some time and everything was ideal for you, would you like to maybe do kind of a demo of sketches of software, having a few screenshots, having that written down, or how would you like to communicate your thoughts?
For the kind of the nature of text ideas, that is maybe more suitable for writing. I think that can be kind of fruit of longer discussions where we really map things out and think and discuss it for a while, and then you write the text instead of doing it yourself. So ideally, having some sort of writing prompts, comparing notes and having discussions, and then writing the text would be a good procedure if we had a lot of time for doing it. That's one part. And I will answer one more for prototypes. I think the temporal dimension is so important. What happens, the interaction, especially we're doing things on computers, we're making text temporal. Screens are very temporal. The text come and go, and there is so much about the hyperness of it, hypertext, that it's really hard to document it with screenshots, because it's we have to show it in a video form at least, or something, or a looping GIF files or whatever. But the temporal dimension must be there, I think, to make sense. Maybe even the commentary. Yeah,
stumbled onto a great idea there. Actually, Adam, the advances in technical documentation would be a fantastic touch point. I mean, it's really changed the game to see GIFs, to see a GitHub README where the repo is hosted publicly in the same place as the instructions. And then you also have this run through, you add to that Loom or not, there really I hadn't thought about that, but there really has been an amazing amount of reframing in regards to technical documentation.
So there's, Adam, so many things you said there, but the first thing I think is really, really interesting. And Alan, you mentioned it earlier, prompts, right? So basically what we might also be saying is that, for the interviews, they're based on prompts. I mean, Stephen Fry threw it out the window and wrote his own piece, lovely. One prime minister actually wrote an answer, 2 of them I did interviews with, but they were prompts. But when you are reading and you don't just highlight, but when you write something in the margin, that is what you're doing, right? That's a prompt on the page that made you write a thing. So imagine if we could create a system whereby someone who reads any of this work, they can write an annotation in the margin. And we've kind of touched on this before, but that annotation then, when they're kind of done reading, becomes a work. Like all the annotations are made in that, right? So that's one view they have, and it's linked to all the locations. And then they can choose to hide and bring forward and do whatever they want, massage it a bit, write some stuff around it. They actually have a valid contribution that isn't just citing, it is woven into that work.
Mm-hmm.
We could then even develop, I mean, in the first book, the last page is you, dear reader. It's just a blank page. But maybe if we try something like this, we can have a page of stuff people who have written in the book have pointed out as questions and provocations. Would you like to comment? So if we manage to build such a system, how would we then deal with, let's say this takes off and becomes a social phenomenon, just to make the best and worst case scenario. Let's say there's 10,000 of these. How would we be able to see that? That in itself would be an amazingly interesting challenge, wouldn't it? Because, like Kindle highlights, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people doing this to be able to provide a cohesive little thing. These are my perspectives on what I read, right?
This is close to my heart, and in fact, even I think I bought the domain name Responsive Writing back in 2011 as the way to approach this. The belief being that we shouldn't be writing articles, we should be writing hubs, and then let the readers create paths between these hubs. And what we think of today as an article is actually just like a canonical path, a path that gained popularity and perhaps is mainly the most effort went into that path. But you could share, if you imagine going through Neil deGrasse Tyson's hub, he's got a narrative here, but you get really caught up in something he said about black holes, and you go deep into a fractal spoke and find something that nobody else saw, in the way that it, not just as a node, but as your narrative path, like how you got there made this really weird connection. And so now you can share that like wavelet. There's the canonical, but here it veers off. You got to check this out. Anyway, that's also veering off, but I would love to see that for the pieces in the collected pieces of future of text. Treat the future of text as a hub.
Yeah, a hub. Exactly. It should be able to do many, but one thing that I think is nice is that this is entirely, I think, within the possibility of being handled through Visual Meta. So in the way we have click on a citation to get a pop-up, because we have the endnotes and the references at the back, there's no reason we can't have a mechanism whereby an item like this is flattened to look very normal, but it has all the affordances of what we are talking about. It can be exploded back, it can be not just linked back, but other stuff can be brought in and so on. So we could probably, because we're talking about the framing of these are the things I went through and this is what I think about it, Anyway, yes, Mark, I'm rambling. Please.
There's an interesting sort of cultural challenge in this, because to a certain extent we're taught to venerate the long form. So the long form still, probably for most of us, whether we want it to be or not, is kind of like the gold standard. And yet there's all this other interesting interplay, and we haven't. So one of the things we're lacking is a way to give that an appropriate weight and standing. So it's not just fluff, it's not just wasted stuff. And I, we're not there yet. We don't have something for it, but that's something that would make that sort of shine. And it's brought to mind by your question about, well, how would I look at all these, lots of future text articles? And it made me start thinking, gosh, well, they're actually quite different in nature. Some definitely are written as sort of finished pieces of prose to stand effectively as a finished article. Others may be much more conjectural, or just a bit of opinion, or of or of the nature you've just been suggesting now, just to sort of think things. So that's an interesting style too, because it becomes not just a way of saying, oh, there are 10,000 things or something, and show me all the 10,000 things. But there's another interesting thing through it, because so some will be a narrative piece. Others may be almost the polar opposite. They may effectively just be a hub. I'm not suggesting that's, well, I don't think it's just one axis, but for sake of argument, you've got some things that are almost they are distinct for being non-linear and deliberate. That's not a bad thing.
Agreed, and I also just to double click on that, or plus one. If we're thinking about the reader's experience, I personally would love to see a compressed, distilled version of Future Text Volume 1 or Volume 2. Like some of these things have really great points that I just want to use as an anchor for other ideas. I remember one in particular, Dave Weiner's article, I can't remember but that one versus the hashtag one. And then others I feel like could be compressed down to a statement or a sentence where I can recall it as needed, but it doesn't need to take that space. So yeah, I think it would be awesome. And I would love to see, I think that would actually create a better experience for the readers, because the content is all over the place in a good way.
I said in the beginning that I need probably to create some sort of a research group. And I think this may be getting close to what we should tackle. My advisor, Wendy, at the very beginning, she said, I don't have time to write anymore. She's a very distinguished academic. She says, I just want to be able to, if I see something on Twitter, put that in, pull in thing, put it in and construct, she was moving her hands, construct something. That's what we're talking about here again. And I think that, yeah, sorry, Raphael.
No, I like Alan's point of view, that it would make a lot of sense if we had, for example, the first volume of the book in a way on the web where people can, build upon it. So somebody can read and read a text, and then they can continue seeing what other people either wrote about it. It's different than comments. It's like you have to publish something, like either an exploration continuing the idea, or something that maybe points to a different direction or points to complementary information. Because I guess it's a little bit wishful thinking, because that's what social media and some other things were supposed to be.
I think that's yeah, I think that's an interesting direction, Raphael, but also the other direction of, here's a new person, they read these books. As they select and write notes, when they're done, they have a page, quote unquote, or a space with all of that. It's like, this is their annotation space. And it looks very much like Adam's workbench kind of a space. It's a very free space for them to do stuff. So there they can, like Lego, put it together. And then they choose to publish that, and they can publish it as part of the volume future of the book, either officially through us or some mechanism whereby they specifically declare that so that it becomes findable. Then we really are back into the hypertextual tiny bit versus large document discussion. And I really have a feeling it will be very, very feasible, provided well, here's the great thing about PDF. It's frozen, so addressability becomes relatively trivial. I'm referring to the third paragraph on page 4. End of story. It's there.
Yeah, it's always there.
Yeah.
There's one other aspect I find myself thinking about, and it was kicked off by Adam's comment about sort of the temporal space, because there's another thing to when we're annotating or drawing lines between. Well, I always find one of the reasons I don't write stuff down as much as I should, because I found that when I write the thing down, what I'm missing when I come back is actually the near temporal context. And when I read that thing and had that thought, it wasn't just informed by the actual thing that I was reading. It was all the other things that weren't on that page that bore into that. And that's a really hard thing to capture. And it's, I guess, the reason why I sort of don't annotate as much as I should, because I haven't found the medium, because that's very much closer to my way of thinking. And I want that richness, which is why I don't sort of highlighting as a mechanism doesn't resonate for me.
This is exciting. Like, I got into a specific state of mind sitting in Cyprus in the morning trying to write the intro to the book. I would like to have some of that captured too. So there's nothing wrong with both time and location stamp at a minimum.
Sure.
Yeah.
But of course, well, yes, you can have location, but I'm not sure in that sense. I'm thinking so much of location. It's more that as I'm reading this, I'm sort of reflecting on maybe the last couple of pages I read, or if it's hi, or if it's a book of parts, a bit like the Future of Text. Well, that there was an article I read just now, one I read yesterday, that sort of bears on this, and it's that bearing that causes me to have this insight about the thing that I'm reading. Oh, that's
well, yeah, no, and that's a great extension. It's basically talking about social media and other companies take our privacy, but we should be able to record everything ourselves. For instance, there's nothing wrong with you tracking yourself on the web, right? So when you click on one of these bits you put in, it's like, why was that interesting? Click on it, and it's like, these are the 10 web pages I went to right before that. All of this is on your system. It's like, oh, hang on, I made a phone call to Alan right before that. There's no reason we cannot track ourselves in every aspect. So I think what you're talking about is a rich and interesting problem for this. We're going to go trick and treating because our flight was delayed, so we're a day off.
It's interesting though, that thing of recording. So I'm conscious that it's sort of nice right now that actually, Adam, I've had a couple of conversations after the sort of the recording had spooled on, where we ended up having a sort of conversation, and there's always this difficult thing of being both present in the conversation and involved in it, and in a sense annotating that at the same time, because I find that sort of quite hard to do. I can either give my full attention to the conversation, let it go where it will, or I can be sitting there, I should have written that down, and that's interesting. And I also wonder that were I to watch that recorded, were I to watch it a week later, whether I'd retained the same insights that were wrapping around inside I was. I mean, I don't know. Some of it, but probably not all of it, which is why that this idea of the temporal context I actually sort of find quite interesting, and how one might get an edge on that.
Well, have you noticed that recordings of Zoom have the time code in the lower right-hand corner? Real world time.
I've got a counter on my upper right corner.
No. The recording when you watch them on YouTube.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah.
So that means that if you say, look at 5:30, it'll be 5:30 there, which is really interesting. So I mean, the stuff we talked about here, we talked about on and off in different ways, but we're basically saying, I want to be able to make a statement about a thought in my head or something that I found. And I want that to be contextually recorded for me to find and work with later, and then to share with as much or as little context as I want. Isn't that kind of part of the thing we're talking about? Right? Whether you are selecting something in a book or in a YouTube in a Zoom meeting, you want to have that in a free-form workspace. And then you share it with a group.
Well, one other complication that I'm sort of your question causing me to reflect on is, so for instance, I'm reading at the moment in sort of parallel as the mood takes me, because some are heavier going than others, 2 books on the sort of history of indexing and how that came about, another one on silent reading, and another one on the future of AI. And it's funny, as I rotate through these, things that I've sort of read have a clarity they didn't have before. So the hardest part is that I couldn't write it down at the time because I didn't know that thing, at the time that I read that thing in a different book, in a different place, it did not have the sort of value or the presence it has now. And that's kind of becomes a mental plate spinning trick, because the problem is when then somebody wants you to go and take a day doing something completely different, because that tends to destroy that web of thought. But trying to compress this down into a challenge is so how do I know something is important before I know it's important? Because I can't record everything,
I feel that for sure. You can't record everything, but it's still amazing when it happens. It feels like, it's part of why I love to read. It's this almost guided by supernatural forces that you are reading this over here, and how could it possibly have been planned that this thing could be coming at it from such a different angle, but be talking about the same thing with different words? Yeah. This is the joy of writing, but oftentimes it gets lost as well. I think about that a lot.
For me, it's a kind of a reading, pass. For me, it's kind of a 3-pass system. So the first time I listen to something, or I read something, I catch a couple of things that, this might be interesting. This might be interesting, but then instead of reading the same material again, what I usually do is I look for either interviews or articles or other materials that talk about the same thing, and then it builds little by little. And that goes for either video, movies, books, or anything that I'm consuming. But in the process of creation, I like to let it sit for a while and then come back to it. I feel like that works for me quite a bit.
I think that's right. I think I find the more compelling sort of ideas to have a gestation period. Simply because, I think experience proves that very few things come fully formed out of the box. And it's more in our youth that we said, I have the answer, and rush off only to find, in fact, it wasn't at all, or it's been done before, or something. And so I think one learns to sort of let it just mull for a bit. That also allows you to look at it from different angles that you weren't doing in the original moment when you had it. So it enriches your perspective of the idea as well.
So basically, this is all about the Finnish entry to Eurovision 2 years ago. Wasn't it called Talk About Things? How can we better talk about things? Refer to things. Yeah. That was a great song.
There was a really interesting little blip on Twitter, an engineer responding to Metaverse, calling it a honeypot for architecture astronauts. And I bring it up because it's a side that we don't talk about too often, but his argument was that real engineers are concerned with, packet loss, compression, these kinds of the real material of the web. And the pejorative term architecture astronauts are the engineers that prefer to think in abstractions or idealizations, perhaps. And, Web3, everything like that. I bring it up not to, I don't know, it was something that I thought I'd bring to the group to consider. It's interesting. It's good to get that. We're often on the embracing what's possible aspect and the other side of it is there are hardcore limits or limits to consider. So I just thought I'd mention that.
But it's interesting. I watched a bit of the the froth metaverse thing that was shown. I was thinking, well, somebody's had to make all that. Somebody's actually had to program all those little bits in that room that you're standing in. And so how does this scale? So it's fine for the Eloi who have stuff given to them for everything, but everyone else's metaverse is going to be the same shitty basement flat they're living in at the moment. So where's the upside in that?
Well, on the thing of the dreamer, there's a story Doug told me. Somebody working for him, very frustrated, came into the office and said, the problem with you, Doug, is that you're a dreamer. And he said, dreaming is really hard. It's easy to throw paint on the wall and then decide that it's the shape of a tree and just do random creative acts. But, the combination of these two kinds of engineering has to be. But, unfortunately, I think of it as kind of slime mold, or even horribly like a cancer. If you look at a cancer, obviously the whole body tries to kill the cancer, which is great. But if it isn't a cancer, if it turns out that the new organ is developing, it'll still try to destroy it because it doesn't know what it is. So until that organ has a real utility, the rest of the organism understands, it's a threat, right? But also if you picture a slime mold moving to find food. If some part of it really stretches really far in one direction, the rest of it will, quote unquote, think, what are you doing over there? That's a waste of resources. There's a bit of sugar right in front of us. But if you don't have those long expeditions, you're never going to find those other ones. However you want to look at it, we need dreamers. Like Ted Nelson is a fantastic dreamer. A lot of his engineering is a bit shaky, but without him provoking people like us, we're kind of screwed. I think our job in the community is to combine the two, right?
Yeah.
Not that I thought I was disagreeing with you. I just wanted that comment that you highlighted.
No, and it's great. Doug's line about dreaming is great too, and it made me think of Claude Shannon. I don't know his exact quote, but it was along the lines of, you break a problem down to its most simple elements, you keep thinking it through until you have it down to this like very primal, this fundamental paradox, and now you have something that you can work with. And there's a mix between the two. There's the dreaming, and then there's also saying, okay, what is the actual atomic bond of our problem with communication these days? Can we actually break it down to something?
I think that's what we were working on a little while ago, maybe 15 minutes ago, with the thing of what we're trying to do is create a system whereby when you have a thought just by itself, or you're inspired by a piece of information for a thought, you need somehow to put that into a recorded form. This is where we're talking about annotation and notes, right? And then you need the second space, which is very much towards Adam's visual world of going through that stuff. You can go through it based on the origin place, which could be the book you annotated, or time, or topic, or whatever. And then once you have a cohesive thing you want to share with someone, which is a little bit the Adam Allen problem, publish that somehow, that someone else can then find the origin bit. So I actually think what we're talking about is quite simple. If we talk back and forth about this a few ways, because, on iOS and Mac now, if you take your cursor to the lower right-hand corner, you get that little note thing coming up. That's created by the son of my master's professor, Harold Thimbleby's son. Forget his first name, Thimbleby, anyway, at Apple. It's really, really cool. But I think it is missing the Adam middle bit of, okay, you made all these notes. Currently, they're just in a list. But you need a really rich way to play with them.
Yeah.
Find them and play with them, right? And then publish them again.
The solution for me is so palpable about what I need from day to day. It's that mix of, I want to jot a simple thing, architecture astronaut, but then I want I want to have that there, and I don't want it to die in a list when I put right next to it Admiral Rickover, right? They're connected in a way, temporal because I met them the same day, but they're also connected thematically. And so that might just be engineers, right? And then this way that I can shift from the throwaway note to what's going on in the background buzz in my brain and access that and tie one to the other, you know, and that could be a growing graph map kind of thing that flips to what I'm thinking about today. It's very tangible in my head. I wish I had time to code it up.
But Alan, that is something that needs something like visual meta to exist, because it needs a structure to come from, to be able to refer back to the structure, right? So if we can develop the whole round trip, if we can develop a way that Alan takes that from a tweet, this happened to be a tweet, puts it into this, and it has whatever tweet ID or whatever Twitter allows us to have, great. But then he comes across something in a book that has visual meta, so it has that information. That metadata allows you to begin experimenting. And this is where Adam's need for making and playing and the temporal aspects and the interaction comes to the fore. But then when you're done, there has to be a publication part of it. And that's where, sorry for being a bit of a portalizer of visual meta and PDF, but at the end of the day, just a day, not forever, you put it in a box and say, this is the state of the world as I see it right now. Hey, change it the next day, I don't care. But you know, other than being in a Google Doc forever or Rome or Notion forever, where people may not have access to it, you made a statement, you've said so and so and so, but look, it's so richly connected to everything else. This is the stuff we're kind of beating about. I think that architecturally, if we want to, we can do whiteboard sessions where we can start outlining the things that need to be done for this. Maybe engineering wise, break it down into a few things we can actually code.
So one of the things that strikes me listening to you say that is that, so that a sort of human level challenge is to work out when an idea is sufficiently formed that it is worthwhile the effort and investment of surfacing it to a level of visibility to others, which is, by which I mean your finished form, because not everything needs to be shared all the time, and these things don't scale well. And some things need longer in consideration than others. I mean, I don't know the answer here, but I think what I'm hearing is there's another presentational boundary there. You know, where one side it's much fuzzier, so one of the points, the thing that causes it to transit that barrier is that it needs to have more substance than it does, say, floating around in your mind or within.
And this is the stressful and important point. I completely agree with you. But part of the solution is what we used to call blogging. You know, you make a blog post, you may make it public, you may not. I'm not saying it should be in WordPress or something that boring, but you do make it as in, you know, not just a bunch of notes, but you write your notes up, and maybe it's only for you ever, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I've always found about that is, certainly for me, is that, you know, finding something that I don't have to make, because if I want it to work, I want it to work. So that means that either somebody else has to maintain it for me, therefore I'm going to pay somebody, or I got to maintain it myself, which actually what happens in the latter case, and I've tried this a few times, that all my effort goes into making the thing nicer. So I don't know quite where the happy position lies there.
Yeah, agreed. I've thought about the blog, or doing the blog thing again as just a ledger of all possible thoughts. And
but Alan, imagine a blog in this thing, right? And imagine, yes, we can have tags, but imagine we also work along the lines of concepts, right? So when you add something, you don't just add it as a sticker, right? So when you add this thing about the astronaut architect thing, you try to either link it to a concept, or you have to write a little bit about it. You can't just, as Mark goes on, and I completely agree with him, don't just pour it into a bucket. You know, there's a difference between a trail. Let yourself be tracked, and everything you do and say can be tracked by a system, fine. Secondary metadata you can search through if you absolutely desperately need it. But you come across this thing, it has some meaning for you. Stamp collectors would put it in a special page.
Yeah.
Right? Facebook people organize their pictures in a certain album. There's not something wrong about saying when you find something worthwhile, you do a little bit of organizing.
Well, I do find, funnily enough, documentation in the organizational context rather than in anything as narrow as a particular tool to be a really logical space for that, be it how a hospital run or how a ministry is run, or how a combine, a company does its things, because there are so many moving parts and the subtle. So in effect, it used to be that you made a handbook, printed on a shelf, it was out of date, you put it there, and you'd all laugh at the hubris of even bothering to produce the book. And actually, how it ran was you need to go and ask Fred or Doris down in the registry, because they'd been there forever and they actually knew the state of play. And for all our clever technical performances, we still haven't got to the level of quality of service that effectively those unnamed humans are doing in many organizations. And I sense it's partly because it takes us where a lot of people don't want to go. It requires not having ownership, which is quite visceral. A lot of people feel very uncomfortable about it.
You're talking organizational level now, Mark, but even
yes, well, yeah, absolutely.
Even within your own work, one of the things I wanted to do forever and ever and ever is when you save a document, you give it a cover, right? So you specify this is a final product that I've published, or this is just notes, or this is unfinished. A little bit of that. So when you then go through, you can say, I want to now refer to my important work, because it's insane on a computer hard drive. You can't tell the difference between your PhD thesis and some notes you scribbled until you open it up, right?
I agree, but that is back to this thing that there's a sort of gestation period to good ideas. And knowing at the time you saved that thing, you probably didn't realize that was the right one. Whether you wrote something after it or nothing after it, it's not always apparent.
Mark, you know the difference between just notes and thoughts, and this is something you've actually published at ACM. But well, because the fact that something has been published and it is yours has a different frame, a different value. And and that's.
But I mean, I know it's very old-fashioned, but I would, for something like that, if it's a paper for a particular conference, everything relating to all the drafts to everything will at least be under one folder, because they absolutely respond to that. That wouldn't be everyone's solution, but that's the way I think.
In a what?
Sorry?
In a what?
Well, under a folder.
A what?
Yeah. Because search is so useless. So you need
Mark,
something.
You were the one who highlighted the research that millennials don't know what a folder is.
I know, no, I'm very conscious of that, and but it's really interesting. People saying that we're now realizing we're having to teach people.
No, but also,
the fact that they don't know is not necessarily a good thing.
No, but Mark, it's also not true what you said in practical terms, because yes, you'll put a lot of stuff in there, but I'm sure that there is some research that you've done that is applicable to more than one document you've written, right? So again, these are different views, right?
Yes, but in the context you mention it, that other thing would be effectively consumed by this document, in essence referenced by it in some way. The canonical copy of that idea, if there was one, would be elsewhere.
This is part of the bigger discussion of,
Sure.
A similar thing, I just saw a job opening at Apple to be a product manager for their books, a job that I would so badly want that, I'll put it this way, if you all pull your strings and give me that job, then I will make sure visual meta happens in Apple books. That'll be, put me in there, I'll be the Trojan horse. Give vent to write Tim Cook and say, hire Alan. I'm in there.
I don't think he reads his emails. Vint has written quite a few letters to him based on this work and nothing. But look, if we should all write you a letter of reference, the whole entire community. But that's really interesting, because also Apple books are dead. I tried to publish The Future of Text as an Apple book. I got an account as an author. There is no way to submit. So this means that they're going to revitalize something, and that's hugely interesting.
I don't know that it means that. I would like to think that.
But there
It
is no
could
such thing
mean
as Apple
there are
Books
some
anymore,
product
is there?
managers that are managers of the dead.
Yeah, fair enough. But are you going to apply?
I don't know. This is being recorded.
Apply.
Hey,
Apply, go ahead.
Did you apply?
I have to get back to my RFQs.
And the worst they can say is yes.
One of the
Promise you
things
one thing.
at the beginning that I kept saying is that all of the things that we want to implement, we need to have partnership in the big companies, because
Yeah,
otherwise
exactly.
it's never going to have, you know, broad appeal or broad
That is it.
use.
We are talking about
So-
platform changes, not startup things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we need either somebody on Google, somebody on Apple, somebody on Microsoft, somebody on
All of them.
Adobe.
All of them.
Yes, all of them.
By the way, Alan, don't forget introduction to the Atlantic editor, both about what we're doing and also the idea of them experimenting with visual meta on. Oh my gosh! Look, there's a ninja.
Whoa! It disappeared.
How do you know? How could you even see that he was here?
Yeah.
Anyway, this is my cue. I have to go. Get the job, Alan,
Right.
and please do the Atlantic Monthly. If you even have an introduction by Friday, I can do a bit of a name drop and say we're talking to them, because this is politics. We're doing this because they're doing it. Oh, can you believe they're doing it? Right? The more names we can.
Okay. I'll mention in there a separation of concerns. Introing and creating a channel is one thing versus, hey, we want to start putting metadata on Atlantic Monthly.
Oh, that'll come a lot
Then
later.
that's a different thing. So
Oh,
the
yeah.
question is, do you want to broach that early on or not? I think it'd make more sense to be like, hey, we have genuine similar concerns. Can we talk? You just said this about the future, about ebooks. This is what I'm doing with text. That's a much more, that could lead to an article that he writes or they write about the future of text to put it into Atlantic. It's sort of open-ended. But if we come at it as like, hey, do you want to put this into your site? Then it's suddenly it's more confrontational.
No, absolutely not. You're absolutely right. It would be, this is what we're doing, isn't it cool? And hopefully at some point they're going to come up with that idea themselves.
Right. Okay. Everyone have a great week. I'll
The
talk
job
about,
is in New
be sending
York,
you
Alan.
emails soon.
I was just going to say earlier when we were all excited and talking that I will come and celebrate the day you get the job in California, but it's in New York. You don't even have to travel.
Exactly.
What the hex?
I know. It would be, honestly, I would, it would be awesome. Be awesome.
Just submit already to the
I will.
Apple Beast. Bye, guys. We're
See you.
going to go treating and
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.